Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the familiar scent of my lavender detergent or the lingering aroma of last night's takeout. This was different. A mix of stale cigarettes and something vaguely floral, like cheap air freshener trying to mask years of neglect. My eyes snapped open and panic immediately set in. The ceiling above me wasn't the smooth white expanse I was used to, but a water-stained mess of cracked plaster. Shadows danced across it, cast by the headlights of passing cars outside unfamiliar windows. "What the hell?" I muttered, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was deeper, rougher, like sandpaper on wood. I sat up abruptly, my head spinning with the sudden movement. The room swam into focus, a dingy studio apartment, clothes strewn across the floor, empty beer cans littering a scratched coffee table. This wasn't my bedroom. This wasn't my apartment. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over a tangled mass of sheets. My legs felt wrong, longer, heavier. I caught a glimpse of myself in a grimy, full-length mirror propped against the wall, and the face staring back at me was that of a stranger. No, I whispered, reaching up to touch his face. The man in the mirror mimicked my movements, his blue eyes wide with the same terror I felt. He was in his late 30s, with a scruffy beard and disheveled brown hair. A faded tattoo peeked out from under the sleeve of my wrinkled t-shirt. This had to be a dream. An incredibly vivid, terrifyingly real dream. I pinched myself hard, wincing at the pain. "Wake up, Jake," I commanded myself. "Wake up." But I didn't wake up. Instead, a shrill alarm blared from a battered phone on the nightstand. I jumped at the sound, nearly knocking over an empty whiskey bottle as I scrambled to silence it. 6:30 a.m., the screen read. Below it, a reminder, "Work, don't be late again." Work? Where? As who? My mind raced as I tried to piece together what was happening. This couldn't be real. People don't just wake up in other people's bodies. That's the stuff of bad sci-fi movies, not real life. A pounding on the door made me yelp in surprise. "Yo, Rick, you alive in there?" A muffled voice called from the hallway. "We gotta go, man. Boss is gonna have our asses if we're late again." Rick, was that my name now? I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. Yeah, just a minute." I looked around frantically, trying to find something, anything that would tell me who I was supposed to be. A wallet lay on the dresser, and I snatched it up, rifling through its contents. The driver's license inside bore the face of the man in the mirror. Richard James Callahan, 37 years old, organ donor. "Come on, dude." The voice outside was getting impatient. "I'm not covering for your hungover ass again." Hungover. That would explain the pounding in my head and the sour taste in my mouth. I ran a hand through my hair, Rick's hair, and took a deep breath. Whatever was happening, I couldn't stay in this apartment forever. I had to play along until I could figure this out. I threw on the least wrinkled clothes I could find, jeans, a faded Metallica t-shirt, and a flannel overshirt. A pair of worn work boots by the door completed the ensemble. As I laced them up, my hands trembled. This was really happening. I opened the door to find a lanky guy in his 20s leaning against the opposite wall, an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. He raised an eyebrow as he gave me a once-over. "Damn, Rick, you look like shit. Rough night?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The guy, whose name I didn't know, just chuckled and clapped me on the shoulder. "Let's go. I'll drive." The ride to wherever we were going was a blur. I sat in the passenger seat of a beat-up pickup truck, trying to act normal while my mind raced. The city outside the window was unfamiliar, definitely not Portland. Squat, industrial buildings lined the streets, and the skyline in the distance was all wrong. "You're quiet this morning," my companion remarked, glancing at me as he navigated through early morning traffic. Usually can't shut you up about whatever girl you're chasing or band you saw. I cleared my throat. Just tired, I guess. He snorted. Yeah, I bet. You were pretty wasted when I dropped you off last night. Thought you might not even make it today. Last night. What had happened last night? I racked my brain, but there was nothing. No memories of Rick's life, no explanation for how I'd ended up here. We pulled into a large construction site, the truck bouncing over uneven ground. A foreman stood near the entrance checking names off a clipboard. As we approached, he fixed us with a stern glare. "Cutting it close, boys," he growled. "One more tardy and you're both out on your asses, got it?" "Yes, sir," my companion said quickly. I nodded, mute. The foreman's eyes narrowed as he looked at me. "You feeling all right, Callahan? You look like death warmed over." "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Just didn't sleep well." He grunted, clearly unconvinced. "Well, try not to fall off any scaffolding today. I don't need the paperwork." As we walked deeper into the site, my heart sank. I didn't know the first thing about construction. How was I supposed to fake my way through a day of this? "Rick!" A booming voice called out, and a burly man in a hard hat waved us over. "Need you on the second floor. We're having trouble with that electrical system again." Electrical system. Oh God. My companion gave me a sympathetic pat on the back. "Good luck, man. Try not to electrocute yourself." As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my mind raced. This was insane. Dangerous. I had no idea what I was doing, and one wrong move could get someone killed. I had to find a way out of this to wake up from whatever this was. But as I reached the top of the stairs and saw a group of men gathered around an open electrical panel, I realized with growing horror that this was all too real. The smell of sawdust and sweat, the weight of the hard hat on my head, the ache in muscles that had clearly been working hard for years. It was all too visceral to be a dream. "About time, Callahan," one of the men said, gesturing to the panel. "This thing's giving us fits. Can you take a look?" I stared at the mess of wires and circuits, my mouth dry. I don't think I should." A sudden wave of dizziness hit me, and I stumbled, catching myself on a nearby support beam. The world swam before my eyes, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. "Whoa, Rick, you okay?" One of the workers stepped forward, concern etched on his face. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. A strange sensation was spreading through my body, a tingling that started in my fingertips and raced up my arms, across my chest, down to my toes. It was as if every cell in my body was vibrating, humming with an energy I couldn't understand. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The dizziness passed, the tingling faded, and I found myself standing there, blinking in confusion. But something had changed. I looked down at my hands, Rick's hands, and flexed them. Somehow, impossibly, I knew exactly what to do. Knowledge that wasn't mine flooded my mind. Years of experience as an electrician. The intricacies of wiring systems, safety protocols, and troubleshooting techniques. "I'm fine," I heard myself say, my voice steady. "Let me take a look at that panel." As I approached the electrical system, my hands moved with a confidence I didn't understand. I identified the problem almost immediately, a faulty circuit breaker that was causing the system to short out. "We need to replace this breaker," I explained to the others, pointing out the issue. "And while we're at it, we should rewire this section here. It's not up to code, and it could cause problems down the line." The other workers nodded, impressed. One of them clapped me on the shoulder. "That's why you're the best, Rick. Don't know what we'd do without you." As I worked, a part of my mind watched in amazement. How was I doing this? Where had this knowledge come from? But another part, the part that felt more and more like Rick with each passing moment, just focused on the task at hand. The day passed in a blur of activity. I moved from one job to another, my body and mind working in perfect sync despite my inner turmoil. By the time the foreman called out that it was time to wrap up, I was exhausted in a way I'd never experienced before, the bone-deep weariness of a day of hard physical labor. As I climbed into my co-worker's truck for the ride home, a sense of unease settled over me. I'd made it through the day, but what happened now? Would I go to sleep and wake up as Jake again, or was this my life now? "Hey, Rick," my co-worker, whose name I'd learned was Tony, said as we pulled up to my apartment building. "We're still on for O'Malley's tonight, right? The guys are counting on you to show up. You promised you'd play a set." Play a set? I opened my mouth to make an excuse, but Rick's memories supplied the answer. He was, a regular at the local bar's open mic night. Guitar. I played guitar. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "Yeah, I'll be there." As I watched Tony drive away, I stood there on the sidewalk, the weight of Rick's life settling onto my shoulders. Somehow I knew that when I walked into that bar tonight, I'd be able to play. I'd know the songs, know the faces of the regulars, know exactly how many drinks it took before Rick's fingers got too clumsy for the strings. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was Rick's last day alive. I didn't know how I knew, or what was going to happen, but as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, I felt time ticking away. I climbed the stairs to Rick's apartment, each step heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. As I reached for the door handle, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, Rick's reflection. His eyes stared back at me, filled with a sadness and resignation that I hadn't noticed before. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the man in the glass. "I don't know why this is happening, but I'm sorry." I pushed open the door and stepped inside. I had a few hours before I needed to be at O'Malley's. A few hours to try to make sense of this impossible situation. A few hours left of Rick's life. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, my own body was lying in a hospital bed, or perhaps already cold in a morgue. And as the night deepened, I wondered whose life I would step into next and whether I would ever find my way back to my own. I jolted awake, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The last thing I remembered was the deafening crash of metal, the sickening lurch as Rick's car rolled, and then darkness. Now I found myself back in my own bed, in my own body, gasping for air like a drowning man breaking the surface. "Jake? Jake!" My roommate Alex burst into the room, his face pale with worry. "Are you okay? I heard you screaming." I looked at him, really looked at him, drinking in the sight of a familiar face after the surreal horror of the past day. "Alex," I croaked, my voice hoarse. What day is it?" He frowned, perching on the edge of my bed. "It's Tuesday, man. The same Tuesday it was when you went to bed last night. Are you sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tuesday. The same day. It was as if no time had passed at all, yet I had lived an entire day, Rick's last day, in what should have been a single night's sleep. "I'm fine," I lied, running a shaky hand through my hair. "Just a really intense dream." Alex didn't look convinced. "Must have been one hell of a dream. You want to talk about it?" I shook my head. How could I possibly explain what had happened? He'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. "Nah, it's fading already," I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I'll be fine. Thanks, though." Alex hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if you're sure. I've got to head to class, but text me if you need anything, okay?" As soon as he left, I scrambled out of bed and rushed to my laptop. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I searched for any news of a fatal car crash, any mention of a Richard Callahan. Nothing. It was as if Rick had never existed. Hours passed as I dove deeper and deeper into my research, looking for any explanation for what I had experienced. Lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, even reincarnation theories. I read it all, desperate for answers. but nothing came close to describing what had happened to me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my cluttered desk, I realized I had been awake for nearly 24 hours. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, and my stomach growled in protest of missed meals. But the thought of going to sleep filled me with a primal dread. What if it happened again? What if I woke up in another person's body, forced to live out their final day? I couldn't bear the thought of experiencing another death, of feeling that helpless as a life slipped away. I pushed back from my desk, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I needed air, needed to move, needed to convince myself that this was real, that I was really here in my own life. The streets of Portland were alive with the usual evening bustle as I wandered aimlessly, my mind racing. Couples strolled hand in hand. Friends laughed over steaming cups of coffee at sidewalk cafes, and the warm glow of streetlights began to flicker on. It all seemed so normal, so mundane. How could the world just go on as if nothing had happened? My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Alex. "Hey, you never showed up to your shift at the bookstore. Everything okay?" Shit. I had completely forgotten about work. I quickly typed out a response, making up an excuse about feeling sick. It wasn't entirely a lie. My stomach churned with anxiety, and a cold sweat had broken out across my forehead. As I pocketed my phone, a wave of exhaustion hit me so hard I had to lean against a nearby building to stay upright. The lack of sleep was catching up to me, and fast. I knew I couldn't stay awake forever, no matter how much I wanted to. With heavy steps, I made my way back to my apartment. Alex was still out, probably at his evening class. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside. I stood in the middle of my room, staring at my bed as if it were the gallows. "This is insane," I muttered to myself. "It was just a dream, a vivid, fucked-up dream. That's all." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. The memory of Rick's life, his rough hands, the smell of his apartment, the weight of the guitar in his arms as he played his final set at O'Malley's. It was all too real, too detailed to be just a dream. I paced the room, fighting against the heaviness of my eyelids. "Stay awake," I commanded myself. Just stay awake. But my body had other plans. As the night deepened, my movements became sluggish, my thoughts foggy. I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, not quite sure how I'd gotten there. "No," I whispered, even as I felt myself listing to the side. "No, please." My eyes closed and I was falling into a darkness that seemed to go on forever. When I opened my eyes again, the world had changed. Gone was my familiar bedroom, replaced by a sunny, cheerful space that smelled of lavender and fresh linen. I was in a bed, but not my own. This one was narrow, with rails on the sides. A hospital bed. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My limbs felt heavy, weak, as if they hadn't been used in a long time. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I couldn't even turn my head. "Oh, you're awake!" A cheerful voice came from somewhere to my left. A moment later, a smiling face came into view. A nurse, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Good morning, Margaret. Did you sleep well?" Margaret. My name was Margaret now. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a feeble croak. The nurse, her name tag read Betty, didn't seem fazed. "Don't you worry about talking, dear. You just rest. Your family will be here soon for their visit. Won't that be nice?" Family? Whose family? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my body, Margaret's body, wouldn't obey. As Betty bustled around the room, checking machines and adjusting my blankets, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The face that stared back at me was that of an elderly woman, her skin papery and pale, her white hair thin and wispy against the pillow. This couldn't be happening. Not again. But even as I denied it, I could feel the truth of it in every labored breath, in the dull ache that seemed to permeate every inch of this frail body. The door opened, and a group of people entered. A middle-aged couple, a young man in his 20s, and two little girls who hung back shyly. "Hi, Mom," the woman said, her voice gentle as she approached the bed. "How are you feeling today?" I stared at her, at all of them, these strangers who looked at me with such love and concern. Margaret's memories began to surface, providing names and relationships. Susan, my daughter, her husband Tom, my grandson Michael. The little girls, twins, were Emily and Sophie, my great-granddaughters. "We brought you some flowers, Grandma," Michael said, holding up a bright bouquet. "Your favorites, daisies." I wanted to thank him, to tell them all how much their visit meant to me, to Margaret. But all I could manage was a weak smile. As they settled in around the bed, talking softly among themselves and to me, I felt a deep sadness well up inside. This was Margaret's family, her loved ones. And this was the last time I, would ever see them. The visit passed in a blur of one-sided conversations and gentle touches. I drifted in and out, Margaret's failing body unable to stay alert for long. But in those moments of clarity, I felt the full weight of what was happening. I was experiencing the end of a life, a long journey coming to its close. As the family prepared to leave, each of them kissed Margaret's cheek and whispered words of love. The little girls waved from the doorway, their young faces untouched by the sadness that lined their parents' and grandmother's features. Once they were gone, the room felt emptier, colder somehow. Betty returned, checking vitals and adjusting medication. "They're such a lovely family," she said as she worked. "You're very lucky, Margaret." Lucky? Was this luck? To be trapped in a body that was shutting down, unable to even say goodbye to the people you loved? As the day wore on, I felt Margaret's strength ebbing away. Her breaths became shallower, her heartbeat more erratic. Doctors came and went, their faces grave as they consulted charts and whispered in the hallway. Night fell, and the hospital grew quiet. In the darkness of the room, lit only by the soft glow of monitoring equipment, I felt a presence. Not a physical one, but a sense of Margaret herself. Her essence, somehow separate from the body we shared. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just about experiencing death. It was about bearing witness to a life, to the love and connections that make that life meaningful. Margaret's body was failing, yes, but her spirit was ready. Ready to let go, surrounded by the echoes of her family's love. As the monitors began to beep more urgently, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Margaret's last conscious thought washed through me, a lifetime of memories, of joy and sorrow, love and loss, all distilled into a single powerful emotion: gratitude. The room filled with a soft, warm light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Margaret's spirit rose, free from the confines of her worn-out body, and in that moment, I felt a connection to something greater than myself, greater than life and death. And then, like a bubble bursting, it was over. I was falling again, tumbling through darkness, Margaret's life slipping away like sand through my fingers. I awoke with a gasp in my own bed, tears streaming down my face. The clock on my nightstand read 3:47 a.m. I had only been asleep for a few hours, but I had lived an entire lifetime. As I lay there, my heart racing, I knew with absolute certainty that this was real. Whatever was happening to me, whatever force was sending me into these other lives, it wasn't going to stop. I stumbled out of bed and to my desk, pulling out a notebook and pen. With shaking hands, I began to write, documenting every detail I could remember of Rick's and Margaret's last days. I didn't know why, but I felt it was important, crucial even, that I record these experiences. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I set down my pen and looked at the pages filled with my frantic scrawl. 2 lives, 2 deaths, and somehow, I knew there would be more. I rubbed my burning eyes, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. But the thought of sleep, of possibly being thrust into another dying body, filled me with dread. What's happening to me? I whispered to the empty room. And how do I make it stop? But as I stared at the growing light outside, a small, traitorous part of me wondered, did I want it to stop? Or was I being given a gift? A terrible, beautiful gift that allowed me to see the true value of life through the lens of death? With a heavy sigh, I reached for my laptop. I had research to do, and somehow, I knew I was running out of time. The harsh glare of my laptop screen was the only light in the room as I hunched over my desk, my eyes burning from hours of intense research. Empty coffee cups littered the surface, testament to my desperate battle against sleep. The clock on my phone mockingly displayed 3:27 a.m., but time had lost all meaning. I scrolled through another forum, my heart racing each time I found a story that seemed similar to mine. But each lead inevitably fizzled out. Hoaxes, creative writing exercises, or experiences that were close but not quite the same. A soft knock at my door made me jump. "Jake?" Alex's voice was muffled through the wood. "You okay in there, man? You've been locked up for days." I rubbed my face, feeling the scratch of stubble. Had it really been days? "Yeah, I'm fine," I called back, wincing at how hoarse my voice sounded. "Just working on something." There was a pause. "Look, I'm worried about you. We all are. You haven't been to work. You're not eating. This isn't like you." Guilt gnawed at me. I knew I was worrying my friends, but how could I explain what was happening? "I know, I'm sorry," I said. I need to figure something out. I promise I'll explain everything soon." Another pause. "Okay," Alex finally said, his voice heavy with concern. "But remember, whatever it is, you don't have to deal with it alone." As his footsteps retreated, I turned back to my laptop, determination renewed. I had to find answers, had to find a way to stop this before it happened again. My eyes fell on my notebook, pages filled with detailed accounts of Rick's and Margaret's last days. I had analyzed every moment, looking for patterns, for anything that might give me a clue about why this was happening to me. One detail stood out. In both cases, I had been within a certain radius of where the person died. Rick's car accident had happened just a few miles from my apartment. The hospital where Margaret passed away was on the other side of town, but still within the city limits. "That's it," I muttered, pulling up a map of Portland. "Maybe if I can get far enough away." The idea took hold, a desperate plan forming in my sleep-deprived mind. I would leave the city, go somewhere far away. Maybe then, when I finally succumbed to sleep, I wouldn't be thrust into another dying body. With shaking hands, I booked a flight to New York City for later that day. It was the farthest destination I could think of on short notice. As I threw some clothes into a backpack, a mix of fear and hope surged through me. This had to work. It had to. The airport was a blur of noise and movement. I stumbled through security, my exhaustion making every step a monumental effort. As I collapsed into my seat on the plane, I felt the weight of days without proper sleep crashing down on me. "First time flying?" I turned to see an elderly woman smiling kindly at me from the next seat. "No, I just haven't slept much lately," I admitted. She patted my hand. "Well, this is a perfect time for a nap. Don't worry, I'll wake you when they come around with drinks." Panic flared in my chest. "No, I mean, thank you, but I can't sleep. I have to stay awake." The woman's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she didn't push the issue. As the plane took off, I gripped the armrests, fighting against the heaviness of my eyelids. I had to make it to New York. I had to break this cycle. Somewhere over the Midwest, my resolve began to crumble. My head nodded, jerking up each time I caught myself drifting off. The gentle hum of the engines and the dim cabin lights were conspiring against me, lulling me towards the very thing I was desperate to avoid. "Sir? Sir, are you all right?" A flight attendant was leaning over me, her face creased with concern. I blinked, trying to focus on her. "I'm fine," I slurred, my tongue feeling thick in my mouth. "Just need to stay awake." She frowned. Sir, you're sweating and shaking. Are you sure you're not ill? I shook my head vehemently, instantly regretting it as the motion sent the world spinning. No, please, I just can't fall asleep. You don't understand, I can't. But even as I protested, I felt myself slipping. The flight attendant's voice faded away, replaced by a roaring in my ears. I was falling, tumbling through that now familiar darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. Gone was the cramped airplane cabin, replaced by open sky and the distant ground far below. Wind whipped at my face and adrenaline surged through my body. I was skydiving. Woohoo! A voice shouted nearby. I turned my head to see a young man grinning wildly as he fell through the air beside me. This is amazing, right, Jason? Jason, that was my name now. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized what was happening. I was in another body, living another last day. And this time I was hurtling towards the earth at terminal velocity. We're coming up on pull time. Another voice crackled through the helmet I was wearing. Remember your training. Nice and steady on the ripcord. Training. Jason's memories flooded my mind. Weeks of ground school, practice jumps, the exhilaration of free fall. This wasn't his first jump, but it would be his last. No, I tried to shout, but the wind tore the word from my mouth. We have to abort, something's wrong. But my companions either couldn't hear me or thought I was just experiencing some last-minute jitters. The altimeter on my wrist was ticking down rapidly. Pull time was approaching. With hands that felt alien and clumsy, I reached for the ripcord. Jason's muscle memory took over, and I yanked hard. Nothing happened. Ice-cold fear flooded my veins as I pulled again and again. The parachute wasn't deploying. I was falling to my death, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Jason, deploy your chute. The instructor's voice was frantic in my ear. I can't, I screamed back. It's not working. The ground was rushing up to meet me, details becoming clearer with each passing second. Trees, buildings, a winding river, all growing larger at a terrifying rate. Emergency chute now. I fumbled for the reserve parachute, my movements jerky with panic. Time seemed to slow as I pulled the second ripcord, praying to whatever might be listening that this one would work. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a violent jerk that knocked the breath from my lungs, the chute deployed. The sudden deceleration made my vision go dark for a second, and when it cleared, I was drifting more slowly, the emergency parachute billowing above me. Relief washed over me, so intense it was almost painful. I had done it. I had saved Jason's life. But as I floated towards the ground, that relief turned to ash in my mouth. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had tried to change fate, to prevent the death I knew was coming. And for what? To prolong the inevitable? As my feet touched the ground, I felt that familiar tugging sensation. The world began to fade around me, Jason's life slipping away like sand through an hourglass. No, I whispered, even as darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. Please, not again. The last thing I saw was Jason's friends running towards me, their faces a mix of relief and lingering fear. Then everything went black. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The airplane cabin swam into focus around me, the drone of the engines a stark contrast to the rush of wind from my dream. No, not a dream. Never just a dream. Oh, thank goodness, the elderly woman next to me said, her hand on my arm. You gave us quite a scare, young man. You were thrashing about something awful. I looked around wildly, my mind still half trapped in Jason's final moments. The flight attendant from earlier was there, along with another passenger who appeared to be a doctor. Sir, can you hear me? The doctor asked, shining a penlight in my eyes. Do you know where you are? I nodded, my mouth dry. On a plane, to New York. Good, that's good, he said, his voice calm and professional. You appear to have had some sort of episode. How long has it been since you last slept? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made the other passengers flinch. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. The flight attendant stepped forward. Sir, given your condition, we're going to have medical personnel meet us when we land. It's just a precaution, she added, seeing the panic on my face. I wanted to protest, to explain that I didn't need a doctor, that what was happening to me was beyond medical science. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I make them understand? As the plane began its descent into New York, I stared out the window at the sprawling city below. I had thought distance would be my salvation, that I could outrun whatever force was causing these experiences. But Jason's death, because I knew now that he had died, despite my efforts to save him, proved that I was wrong. There was no escaping this, no running away. Whatever was happening to me, whatever cosmic game of musical chairs I had been thrust into, it wasn't bound by physical distance. As we touched down on the runway, a new resolve hardened within me. I couldn't keep fighting this, couldn't keep trying to stay awake forever. It was time to face whatever was coming head on. I would sleep. I would experience these deaths, these final moments of strangers' lives. And I would find a way to understand why this was happening to me, what I was meant to learn from it all. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began to stand, retrieving their luggage from the overhead compartments. But I remained seated, my mind racing with the implications of my decision. Are you sure you're all right, dear? The elderly woman asked as she gathered her things. I looked at her, really looked at her, wondering for a moment if I might one day experience her final moments. The thought sent a chill down my spine. No, I said honestly. I'm not all right. But I think I might be getting there. As I was escorted off the plane by concerned flight staff, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I didn't know what the future held, how many more deaths I would witness or live through. But I knew that running wasn't the answer. Whatever this was, curse, gift, or cosmic accident, I had to see it through. I had to understand. And maybe, just maybe, in understanding, I would find a way to make it stop. Or, a small voice whispered in the back of my mind, a way to make it mean something. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed overhead, casting in sickly pallor over my already exhausted face. I sat hunched in an uncomfortable plastic chair, my backpack clutched to my chest like a lifeline. Around me, the steady hum of medical equipment and hushed conversations created a surreal backdrop to my inner turmoil. Mr. Henderson? A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. The doctor will see you now. I nodded, standing on shaky legs. As I followed her down the sterile hallway, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. How many times had I walked corridors like this in other people's bodies, in their final hours? The examination room was small and impersonal. Dr. Patel, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, entered shortly after me. So, Mr. Henderson, he began, glancing at my chart. I understand you experienced some distress on your flight. Can you tell me what happened? I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. Doctor, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I've been experiencing something impossible. Every time I fall asleep, I wake up in someone else's body, someone who's about to die. Dr. Patel's expression remained neutral, but I saw his hand twitch towards the panic button on the wall. I see. And how long has this been happening? A few days? A week? I'm not sure anymore. I've been trying to stay awake, but on the plane, I couldn't fight it anymore. He nodded slowly, jotting something down. Mr. Henderson, have you been under any unusual stress lately? Any major life changes or traumas? I laughed bitterly. Other than living through multiple deaths? No, nothing out of the ordinary. Dr. Patel set down his clipboard and leaned forward, his voice gentle. Jake. May I call you Jake? I understand that what you're experiencing feels very real to you, but I think we need to consider the possibility that these experiences are a manifestation of severe sleep deprivation and possibly an underlying mental health condition. You don't believe me, I said flatly. It's not about belief, Jake. It's about finding the best way to help you. I'd like to admit you for observation and some tests. We can start you on a mild sedative to help you get some rest and... No. I stood up abruptly, my chair screeching against the linoleum. No sedatives. You don't understand. If I sleep, someone will die. I'll have to live through it again. Dr. Patel held up his hands in a calming gesture. All right, no sedatives for now, but Jake, you need sleep. Your body and mind can't continue like this. Please let us help you. I sank back into the chair, the fight draining out of me. He was right. I couldn't go on like this. My own life was unraveling, and for what? I couldn't stop these deaths from happening. Maybe it was time to accept help, even if it meant being labeled as crazy. Okay, I whispered. Okay, I'll stay. But please, no sedatives. Let me fall asleep on my own. Dr. Patel nodded, relief evident on his face. Thank you, Jake. We'll take good care of you, I promise. The next few hours passed in a blur of intake forms, blood draws, and concerned looks from hospital staff. As night fell, I found myself in a private room, the steady beep of a heart monitor my only company. I stared at the ceiling, fighting against the heaviness of my eyelids. Despite my fear, my body was betraying me, desperate for the rest I'd been denying it. As I felt myself slipping away, a single tear rolled down my cheek. I'm sorry, I whispered to the empty room, to whoever's life I was about to step into. I'm so sorry. The darkness took me, and when I opened my eyes again, the world had changed. I was in a brightly lit laboratory, the air humming with the sound of sophisticated equipment. My hands, slender, feminine hands with neatly manicured nails, were steady as they pipetted a clear liquid into a series of test tubes. Dr. Chen? A voice called from behind me. The results from the latest trial are in. I turned, seeing a young man in a lab coat holding out a tablet. As I took it, memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I was Dr. Amelia Chen, a brilliant biochemist on the verge of a groundbreaking discovery, a potential cure for a rare, aggressive form of cancer. Thank you, David, I heard myself say, my voice calm and authoritative despite the excitement I could feel bubbling up inside. Let's take a look. As I scrolled through the data, my heart began to race. The results were better than we dared to hope. The compound was showing remarkable efficacy in targeting and destroying cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue unharmed. This is incredible, I breathed, looking up at David with wide eyes. If these results hold up in human trials, we could be looking at a cure. We need to replicate these tests immediately, then prepare for the next phase. David nodded eagerly, already moving to set up the equipment. As we worked, I felt a sense of urgency unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just Amelia's passion, it was her life's work, and somehow I knew it was the last thing she would ever do. Hours passed in a flurry of activity. We ran test after test, each one confirming our initial findings. As the sun began to set outside the lab windows, I felt a mixture of elation and growing dread. We did it, Dr. Chen, David said, his face split in a wide grin. This is going to change everything. I nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm. It will. David, I need you to do something for me. Take all of this data, every note, every result, and make multiple backups. Store them in different locations. This research cannot be lost. Do you understand? He looked at me quizzically. Of course. But why the urgency? We can submit for publication next week after we've had a chance to review everything. I shook my head. No. It needs to be done now. Please, David. Trust me on this. Something in my tone must have convinced him. He nodded and set to work, copying files and printing out reams of data. As he worked, I sat down at Amelia's computer and began to type furiously, documenting every thought, every theory, every potential next step. My head began to throb, a pain building behind my eyes. I ignored it, pushing through, desperate to get every bit of Amelia's brilliance down before it was too late. "Dr. Chen?" David's voice seemed to come from far away. "Dr. Chen, are you all right?" I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The pain in my head had become unbearable, my vision blurring. I was dimly aware of David calling for help, of hands lowering me to the floor. As my consciousness faded, I had one last desperate thought. It can't end like this. The research, it has to continue. I gasped awake in my hospital bed, the heart monitor beside me beeping frantically. A nurse rushed in, her face etched with concern. "Mr. Henderson? Jake? Can you hear me?" I nodded, unable to speak as tears streamed down my face. The loss I felt was overwhelming, not just for Amelia, but for the potential her work had held. How many lives could have been saved by her discovery? How many people would suffer because she didn't have the chance to complete her research? As the nurse checked my vitals and tried to calm me down, a terrible realization dawned on me. These experiences weren't just about witnessing death. They were showing me the ripple effects of each life lost, the potential snuffed out, the differences these people could have made. "I need to speak to Dr. Patel," I managed to croak out. "Please, it's urgent." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "I'll page him, but you need to try to relax, okay? Your heart rate is through the roof." As she left the room, I closed my eyes, Amelia's last moments replaying in my mind. I couldn't save her. I was beginning to accept that I couldn't save any of them. But maybe, just maybe, I could make their deaths mean something. When Dr. Patel arrived, looking rumpled and concerned, I took a deep breath. "Doctor, I know you don't believe me about what's happening, but I need you to listen. There's a biochemist named Dr. Amelia Chen. She's going to die soon, probably from an aneurysm or stroke. But her work, she's on the verge of a major breakthrough in cancer treatment. You need to find her, to make sure her research isn't lost." Dr. Patel's brow furrowed. "Jake, I understand you believe this is real, but..." "Please," I interrupted, my voice cracking. Just look into it. If I'm wrong, what's the harm? But if I'm right, think of how many lives could be saved." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, Jake, I'll make some inquiries, but I want you to understand that this doesn't mean I believe in what you think is happening. My primary concern is your health and well-being." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Dr. Patel left, I sank back into my pillows, exhaustion pulling at me once again. But this time, the fear of sleep was tempered by a new sense of purpose. I couldn't stop these deaths from happening, but maybe I could make them count for something. As I drifted off, I silently promised Amelia, and Rick, and Margaret, and Jason that their stories wouldn't end with their deaths. Somehow, I would find a way to carry on their legacies, to make sure the world didn't lose the gifts they had to offer. The darkness took me once again, but this time, I went willingly into its embrace, ready to bear witness to another life, another death, and the ripples they would leave behind. The rhythmic beeping of hospital machines had become a perverse lullaby, punctuating the twilight zone between my waking life and the lives I inhabited in sleep. Dr. Patel's concerned face swam before me, his voice a distant echo. "Jake, your body is shutting down. We need to induce a medical coma to..." "No," I croaked, my throat raw from days of fitful sleep and desperate awakenings. "You don't understand. I have to stay awake. I have to..." But even as I protested, I felt the familiar pull of exhaustion. The hospital room blurred, fading into darkness. I was falling again, tumbling into another life, another death. When I opened my eyes, the world had shifted. Gone was the sterile hospital room, replaced by a cluttered apartment. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the sour smell of stale beer. I was sitting on a worn couch, a half-empty bottle dangling from my fingers. As awareness seeped in, so did the memories. I was Mark Holloway, 42, a once promising writer now drowning in a sea of rejection letters and missed deadlines. And today was the day he, had decided to end it all. The weight of Mark's despair crashed over me like a tidal wave. I could feel the gun pressed against my thigh, hidden beneath a cushion. The decision had already been made. All that was left was to follow through. "No," I whispered, Mark's voice rough with emotion. "This can't be how it ends." I stood up abruptly, pacing the small apartment. Scattered papers covered every surface, fragments of unfinished stories and novels. A life's work, incomplete and unappreciated. The walls were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of Mark's failures. A sharp knock at the door startled me out of my spiral. "Mark, you in there?" A woman's voice tinged with worry. "It's Sarah. You haven't been answering your phone?" Sarah. Mark's memories supplied the context. His sister, the only person who still believed in him. With shaking hands, I opened the door. Sarah stood there, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Jesus, Mark, you look like hell." "Thanks," I muttered, stepping aside to let her in. "What are you doing here?" Sarah wrinkled her nose at the state of the apartment. "Checking on you, obviously. You missed Mom's birthday dinner again. She's worried sick." Guilt gnawed at me, at Mark. "I've been busy, working on a new story." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? That's great. Can I see it?" I hesitated, Mark's instinct to push her away warring with my desperate need to change the course of this day. "It's not ready yet, but maybe you could help me brainstorm?" For the next hour, we sat on the couch, the hidden gun a constant presence in my mind as we talked about story ideas. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious, and I could feel a spark of hope kindling in Mark's chest. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, the darkness crept back in. Sarah had to leave, and with her would go the tenuous lifeline she'd thrown. "I should get going," she said, standing up. "But this was good, Mark. I'm glad you're writing again. Promise me you'll keep at it?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she reached the door, a sudden panic gripped me. "Sarah, wait." The words burst out before I could stop them. I need help." She turned, her expression softening. "What kind of help, Mark?" My hand inched towards the cushion hiding the gun. "I've been thinking about ending things. I can't see a way out." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Oh, Mark," she whispered, rushing back to me. "Why didn't you say something sooner? We'll get you help, okay? Whatever you need. You're not alone in this." As she hugged me tightly, I felt something crack inside Mark's chest. Tears flowed freely as years of pent-up pain and frustration poured out. Sarah held on, murmuring words of comfort and support. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of phone calls and quiet conversations. Sarah called their parents, arranged for Mark to stay with them for a while. She found a therapist who could see him on short notice. Through it all, she never left his side. As night fell and Sarah prepared to leave, promising to return in the morning to help him pack, I felt a profound sense of relief. Mark would live. He would get help. His story wasn't over yet. But as the door closed behind Sarah, leaving me alone in the apartment, a new weight settled on my shoulders. I had changed things. I had interfered in a way I never had before. Was that right? Was it my place to alter the course of these lives I briefly inhabited? As I pondered this, the familiar sensation of fading began to take hold. The world grew dim around the edges, Mark's life slipping away like sand through an hourglass. But this time, instead of death, I was leaving behind a chance at life. I gasped awake in my hospital bed, the monitors beeping frantically. Dr. Patel was there in an instant, his face a mask of professional concern. "Jake, can you hear me? Try to stay calm, you're safe." I nodded weakly, my mind reeling from the transition. "Dr. Patel," I croaked, "I need to tell you something." He leaned in, his brow furrowed. "What is it, Jake?" "I changed something," I whispered. "I stopped a suicide. I've never done that before. I've never been able to change the outcome." Dr. Patel's expression softened. "Jake, I understand these experiences feel very real to you, but I need you to consider the possibility that your mind is creating these scenarios as a way to process your own feelings." I shook my head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. This was different. I made a choice. I interfered. And now I don't know if that was the right thing to do." The doctor sighed, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "All right, let's talk through this. Why do you think it might not have been the right choice to prevent a suicide?" I closed my eyes, trying to organize my thoughts. "It's not that I think suicide is right, but who am I to make that decision for someone else? These experiences, these deaths I've been witnessing, they all seem to have a purpose. They were meant to happen, but this time I changed that. What if I've disrupted something important?" Dr. Patel was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Jake, as a medical professional, I have to say that preventing suicide is always the right choice. We can't know what the future holds, but we can give people the chance to find out. However, I'm more interested in why you feel this particular experience was different from the others." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. "Because for the first time I felt like I had a choice, like I could actually change the outcome, and that terrifies me. If I can change things, then I'm responsible. For every life I don't save, for every death I witness, I'm letting it happen." The weight of this realization crashed over me, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Dr. Patel placed a comforting hand on my arm. "Jake, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for the lives or deaths of others. Whether these experiences are real or a product of your mind, the ethical burden you're placing on yourself is too great for any one person to bear." I shook my head, frustration building. "But if I can make a difference, don't I have an obligation to try? Every time I fall asleep, I'm stepping into someone's last moments. If there's even a chance I could save them." "At what cost, Jake?" Dr. Patel interrupted gently. "Look at what this is doing to you. Your body is shutting down. You're in a hospital bed, barely able to distinguish reality from these experiences. How can you hope to help others if you destroy yourself in the process?" His words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. In my desperate attempt to understand and control these experiences, I had been neglecting my own life, my own health. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, feeling more lost than ever. Dr. Patel squeezed my arm reassuringly. "For now, you need to rest. Real, uninterrupted sleep. I know you're afraid, but your body can't go on like this. Will you let us help you?" I closed my eyes, weighing the decision. The thought of willingly slipping into another death terrified me, but the thought of continuing like this, trapped between worlds, was equally daunting. Finally, I nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. "Okay, I'll try." Relief washed over Dr. Patel's face. "Thank you, Jake. We'll be right here with you. You're not alone in this." As the doctor prepared a mild sedative, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had changed a life today, saved it even. But at what cost? And what would happen when I closed my eyes again? The medication began to take effect, and I felt myself drifting. But this time, instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of resolution. Whatever came next, whatever life I stepped into, I would face it head on. I would bear witness, carry their stories, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to make it all mean something. As consciousness slipped away, I whispered a quiet promise to the empty room and to all the lives I had yet to encounter. "I'll do my best. For all of you. I promise." The darkness took me, and I surrendered to whatever fate awaited on the other side. The steady drip of an IV and the soft whir of medical equipment formed a hypnotic rhythm as I drifted in and out of consciousness. Dr. Patel's voice floated through the haze, discussing my case with someone I couldn't see. Extreme sleep deprivation, vivid hallucinations, possible underlying neurological condition. I wanted to protest, to explain that what I was experiencing was far more than hallucinations, but my tongue felt heavy, uncooperative. The sedative they'd given me pulled at the edges of my awareness, threatening to drag me under completely. A new voice cut through the fog, crisp, authoritative. I'd like to run some additional tests, an fMRI perhaps. His brain activity during these episodes is unusual. Dr. Emerson, Patel replied, surprise evident in his tone. I didn't expect the head of neurology to take an interest in this case. Let's just say I have a professional curiosity in unusual sleep disorders, Emerson said. Prep him for the scan. I want to see what's happening in real time. As they wheeled my bed through the hospital corridors, I fought against the sedative, terrified of what might happen if I fell asleep during the scan. But it was a losing battle. The rhythmic movement lulled me deeper into unconsciousness, and I felt the familiar sensation of falling, of being pulled into another life. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. Gone was the bustling hospital. Instead, I found myself in a dimly lit room, the air heavy with the scent of antiseptic. I was lying in a bed, but not my hospital bed. This one was narrower, surrounded by softly beeping machines. As awareness seeped in, so did the memories. I was Sophia Reeves, 28 years old, and I had been in a coma for the past 3 months following a car accident. Panic gripped me as I realized I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Sophia's body was unresponsive, a prison of flesh and bone. But her mind, my mind, was alive, aware, screaming silently into the void. Any changes, Dr. Myers? A nurse's voice, tinged with forced optimism. A sigh. No, nothing significant. Her EEG shows some increased activity, but, well, it's probably just a reflex. Footsteps approached the bed, and a kind-faced man in a white coat leaned over me. Dr. Myers, Sophia's memories supplied. He had been overseeing her case since the accident. Sophia, can you hear me? He asked, his voice gentle but resigned, as if he'd asked this question 100 times before without response. If you can understand me, try to move your fingers or blink your eyes. I screamed internally, willing Sophia's body to respond. Nothing happened. Dr. Myers straightened, shaking his head. No change. Let's run another set of tests, but I think it might be time to discuss options with the family. Options. The word sent a chill through me. They were thinking about letting Sophia go, about turning off the machines keeping her alive. But she was here, aware, trapped inside her own mind. As the medical staff bustled around preparing for more tests, I focused all my energy on trying to make some sort of connection, to bridge the gap between Sophia's dormant body and her active mind. Hours passed in a blur of frustration and fear. Doctors came and went, running tests, discussing Sophia's condition in hushed tones. Through it all, I remained a silent observer, unable to communicate, unable to give them the sign they so desperately wanted. As night fell and the hospital quieted, a new visitor entered the room. An older woman with Sophia's eyes and a face lined with worry. Her mother. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, taking Sophia's limp hand in hers. "I'm here. Mom's here." The love and pain in her voice were almost unbearable. I wanted to squeeze her hand, to tell her that Sophia was still here, still fighting. But the disconnect between mind and body remained insurmountable. Sophia's mother settled into the chair beside the bed, still holding her daughter's hand. "I brought your favorite book," she said, pulling a worn paperback from her bag. I thought I'd read to you for a while." As she began to read, her voice soft and soothing, something stirred within Sophia's mind. A memory, sharp and vivid, of countless nights spent just like this. her mother reading her to sleep, chasing away nightmares and fears. In that moment, fueled by love and memory, I felt something shift. A tingling sensation spread through Sophia's body, a reconnection of mind and matter. With every ounce of will I possessed, I focused on her hand, on the fingers intertwined with her mother's. And then, miraculously, they moved. Just a slight twitch, barely perceptible. But it was enough. Sophia's mother gasped, the book falling from her lap. "Sophia? Sophia, did you just move?" Another twitch, stronger this time. Tears streamed down her mother's face as she reached for the call button, her voice choked with emotion as she called for the nurse. The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Dr. Myers arrived, his earlier resignation replaced by cautious hope as he examined Sophia. "Sophia, if you can hear me, I want you to try to blink," he instructed, leaning close. It took every ounce of concentration, but slowly, painfully, Sophia's eyelids fluttered. "Oh my God," Dr. Myers breathed. "She's responding. This is incredible." As the medical team worked, running new tests and adjusting equipment, I felt a surge of triumph. Sophia was coming back. She would have a chance to live, to recover, to be with her family again. But as the initial elation faded, a creeping dread began to set in. The machines around the bed were beeping more insistently, their rhythm becoming erratic. "Doctor, her heart rate is spiking," a nurse called out, her voice tense. Dr. Myers frowned, studying the monitors. "Blood pressure's rising too. This level of neural activity after such a long period of dormancy, it might be too much stress on her system." I felt it then, a building pressure in Sophia's chest, a racing of her heart that felt wrong, dangerous. The connection I had fought so hard to make was now putting her at risk. "She's going into cardiac arrest." The words cut through the chaos like a knife. As alarms blared and the medical team rushed to save Sophia, I felt myself being pulled away, torn from her consciousness. The last thing I heard was the high-pitched whine of a flatline. I jolted awake in the fMRI machine, gasping for air. Voices shouted around me, hands pulling me out of the narrow tube. Jake, can you hear me?" Dr. Patel's face swam into view, his expression a mix of concern and awe. I nodded weakly, my throat too dry to speak. As they transferred me back to a bed, I caught snippets of urgent conversation. Never seen brain activity like that. Impossible connections forming. Could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness. Dr. Emerson appeared at my bedside, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "Jake, what you just experienced, it was extraordinary. Your brain was operating in a way I've never seen before, forming connections that shouldn't be possible." I swallowed hard, finding my voice at last. "Sophia," I croaked. "Is she—" Dr. Patel and Dr. Emerson exchanged a glance. "Jake," Patel said gently, "there is no Sophia. You were in the scanner the whole time, but something incredible happened in your brain." I shook my head, frustration building. "No, you don't understand. She was real. She was in a coma, and I helped her wake up, but then something went wrong." Dr. Emerson leaned in, her voice intense. "Jake, I need you to tell me everything you remember, every detail. What you experienced might be the key to understanding a whole new level of human consciousness." As I recounted Sophia's story, the doctors listened with rapt attention. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Dr. Patel spoke. "Jake, I owe you an apology. I didn't believe you before about these experiences. But after what we saw in the scan, I think we need to consider the possibility that what's happening to you is very real and very important." Dr. Emerson nodded in agreement. "We're in uncharted territory here. Jake, with your permission, I'd like to run more tests. We need to understand what's happening in your brain when you have these experiences." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the implications. They believed me now, but at what cost? Sophia, whoever she was, had suffered because of my presence in her mind. I don't know if I can do this again, I whispered. What if I hurt someone else? Dr. Patel placed a comforting hand on my arm. We'll take every precaution. But Jake, what you're experiencing, it could change everything we know about the nature of consciousness, of life, and death itself. I opened my eyes, meeting their eager gazes. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. If I agreed to this, I would be subjecting myself to more of these intense, often traumatic experiences. But if there was even a chance that it could lead to a greater understanding, that it could help people like Sophia. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. But promise me you'll find a way to make this mean something. As the doctors nodded solemnly, I felt a mix of fear and determination wash over me. Whatever came next, whatever lives I stepped into, I would face it with purpose. For Sophia, for all the others I had witnessed, and for the countless lives that might be changed by what we discovered. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with ethical dilemmas and unknown dangers. But for the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we were on the verge of understanding the profound connection between all human consciousness. A connection that transcended the boundaries of individual lives and even death itself. As I settled back into my hospital bed preparing for whatever tests lay ahead, I silently renewed my promise to all those whose lives I had touched and would touch in the future. I'll bear witness. I'll carry your stories. And together we'll find the meaning in all of this. I swear it. The soft glow of computer screens illuminated the dimly lit research lab, casting an eerie blue light over the faces of Dr. Emerson and her team. I sat in the center of a web of wires and electrodes, my heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Are you ready, Jake? Dr. Emerson asked, her voice gentle but tinged with excitement. I nodded, trying to swallow past the lump in my throat. As ready as I'll ever be. Over the past week, I had undergone a battery of tests, each one more intense than the last. But this was different. Tonight, they would attempt to induce one of my episodes under controlled conditions. Dr. Patel approached, a syringe in hand. This is a mild sedative, he explained. It should help you fall asleep more easily. Remember, we'll be monitoring you the entire time. If anything seems wrong, we'll wake you immediately. As the cool liquid entered my veins, I closed my eyes, bracing myself for what was to come. The familiar sensation of falling began almost immediately, the lab fading away as I tumbled into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the research facility. Instead, I found myself in a small, cluttered office, the walls lined with bookshelves overflowing with texts in languages I didn't recognize. As awareness seeped in, so did the memories. I was Dr. Elias Khoury, a 62-year-old professor of linguistics at the American University of Beirut. And I had just made a discovery that could rewrite history. My hands, Elias's hands, trembled as I picked up an ancient clay tablet from my desk. The cuneiform script etched into its surface was unlike anything I had seen before, a hybrid of known languages that shouldn't have existed in the same time and place. This can't be right, I muttered, Elias's voice rough with excitement and disbelief. If this is authentic, it would mean... A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Khoury? A young woman poked her head in. Nadia, my research assistant. The carbon dating results are back. I waved her in eagerly, barely able to contain my excitement. And? Nadia handed me a folder, her eyes shining. It's genuine, Professor. The tablet dates back to approximately 3200 BCE, exactly where you predicted it would be. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This tablet, with its impossible mix of linguistic elements, could potentially prove the existence of a previously unknown ancient civilization, one that might have been the precursor to all known early cultures. We need to publish these findings immediately, I said, already reaching for my laptop. This could change everything we thought we knew about the origins of human civilization. As I began to type furiously, outlining our discoveries. A sharp pain lanced through my left arm. I gasped, clutching at my chest. "Professor?" Nadia's voice was distant, concerned. "Are you all right?" The pain intensified, spreading across my chest like fire. I tried to speak, to tell Nadia to call for help, but no words came out. The world tilted sideways as I slumped in my chair. "Professor Khoury!" Nadia's scream seemed to come from very far away. "Someone help! Call an ambulance!" As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, my last coherent thought was of the tablet. The discovery couldn't die with me. It was too important. With the last of my strength, I pushed the laptop towards Nadia. "Publish," I managed to gasp. "Make sure. The world knows." Then everything went black. I jolted awake in the lab, alarms blaring around me. Dr. Emerson and her team rushed to my side, their faces masks of concern and excitement. Jake, can you hear me?" Dr. Patel's voice cut through the chaos. I nodded weakly, my heart still racing from the intensity of the experience. "Elias," I gasped. He had a heart attack. The discovery." "Slow down," Dr. Emerson said, placing a calming hand on my arm. "Take a deep breath and tell us everything you remember." As I recounted the experience, Dr. Emerson's eyes grew wide. She turned to one of her assistants. "Run a search for Dr. Elias Khoury, linguistics professor at the American University of Beirut. Look for any recent news or publications." The assistant nodded and hurried to a computer. The room fell into a tense silence as we waited, broken only by the soft tapping of keys. "Found something," the assistant called out after what felt like an eternity. A press release from the American University of Beirut, dated today. Renowned linguist Dr. Elias Khoury passes away, leaving behind groundbreaking discovery. A collective gasp went through the room. Dr. Emerson turned to me, her face pale. "Jake, this is unprecedented. You didn't just experience a random death. You were there for a moment of immense historical importance." The weight of what had happened settled over me like a heavy blanket. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why am I experiencing these specific deaths? There has to be a reason." Dr. Patel leaned in, his brow furrowed in thought. "Jake, in all of your experiences so far, has there been a common thread? Something that links them all together?" I closed my eyes, thinking back over the lives I had briefly inhabited. Rick, the construction worker with hidden talents. Margaret, surrounded by her loving family. Amelia, the scientist on the verge of a cancer breakthrough. Mark, the writer pulled back from the brink of suicide. Sophia, trapped in her own mind. And now Elias, with his world-changing discovery. They all had something important left to do, I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. Something that would have a significant impact on others, but they didn't get to finish it. Dr. Emerson nodded excitedly. "That's it. Jake, you're not just experiencing random deaths. You're witnessing pivotal moments in people's lives, moments that could have far-reaching consequences if they were allowed to play out." "But why me?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since this all began. Why am I the one experiencing this? Dr. Patel and Dr. Emerson exchanged a glance. "We have a theory," Dr. Patel said cautiously. "Based on the brain scans we've done, it appears that your consciousness is uniquely flexible. You have an extraordinary ability to form neural connections that shouldn't be possible. In a way, you're acting as a bridge between consciousnesses." The implications of this were staggering. So, what does this mean? What am I supposed to do with this ability? Dr. Emerson leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Jake, I think you might be the key to understanding the very nature of consciousness itself. These experiences you're having, they're not just about witnessing deaths. They're about the interconnectedness of all human experience, the ripple effects of every life and every choice." A heavy silence fell over the room as we all grappled with the enormity of what this could mean. Finally, I spoke. So what now? Do we just keep doing this? Keep watching people die without being able to change anything? Dr. Patel shook his head. Not necessarily. Jake, in some of your experiences, you've been able to influence events, even if only slightly. What if that's the point? What if you're meant to be a catalyst to set things in motion that these people couldn't finish themselves? The idea sent a shiver down my spine. But how? How can I possibly know what to do in the few moments I have in each life? Dr. Emerson stood up, pacing the room as she thought aloud. We need to approach this systematically. Jake, when you're in these experiences, you have access to the person's memories, right? I nodded. Then we need to train you to quickly identify the most important aspects of their lives, the things they left unfinished. And then we need to figure out how to leave a trace of that knowledge behind. Like with Sophia, I said, remembering the coma patient I had briefly inhabited. I was able to make a connection to help her start to wake up. Exactly, Dr. Emerson said, her excitement palpable. But we need to be careful. As we saw with Sophia, there can be unintended consequences. We need to find a way for you to make these connections without putting additional stress on the person's system. Dr. Patel nodded in agreement. It's a delicate balance, but if we can figure it out, the potential for positive impact is enormous. As the doctors continued to discuss possibilities, my mind raced with the implications of what we were considering. The ability to influence lives at their most critical moments, to potentially change the course of history. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. I'll do it, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Whatever it takes, whatever training you think I need. If there's a chance we can make a difference, to help these people leave something behind, I want to try. Dr. Emerson and Dr. Patel exchanged a look of relief and determination. All right, Jake, Dr. Emerson said. We'll start first thing tomorrow. We'll need to run more tests, develop new protocols. This isn't going to be easy, but if we're right about what's happening, we could be on the verge of a breakthrough that changes everything we thought we knew about life, death, and human consciousness, Dr. Patel finished. As the team began to prepare for the next phase of our research, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me. Whatever came next, whatever lives I stepped into, I would face them with a new sense of purpose. For Elias, for all those whose stories I had witnessed, and for all those yet to come, I would learn to bridge the gap between life and death, to carry forward the sparks of potential that might otherwise be lost. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with ethical dilemmas and unknown dangers, but for the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we were on the verge of understanding the profound connection between all human consciousness. A connection that transcended the boundaries of individual lives and even death itself. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my dreams were filled with fragments of lives not my own, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. And somewhere in that cosmic weave, I sensed a pattern emerging. A pattern that, if we could only understand it, might hold the key to unlocking the greatest mysteries of existence itself. The harsh fluorescent lights of the lab seemed to pulse in time with my pounding headache. I sat slumped in a chair, electrodes still attached to my temples, as Dr. Emerson and Dr. Patel pored over the latest batch of data. Jake, your neural activity during these episodes is off the charts, Dr. Emerson said, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. But the strain on your system, it's significant. I nodded wearily. After weeks of intense training and countless controlled deaths, I felt hollowed out, a mere shell of my former self. Dr. Patel approached, his brow furrowed. Jake, I think we need to consider taking a break. Your latest blood work shows— No, I interrupted, my voice hoarse but determined. We can't stop now. We're so close to understanding this. The doctors exchanged a worried glance. Jake, Dr. Patel said gently, I know you feel a responsibility to continue, but your health has to come first. These experiences are taking a toll on you, both physically and mentally. I stood up abruptly, ignoring the wave of dizziness that washed over me. You don't understand. Every time I close my eyes, I'm there, with them. Even when we're not doing the controlled tests, I can't escape it. A heavy silence fell over the lab. Finally, Dr. Emerson spoke. Jake, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Get some rest. We'll reconvene tomorrow and discuss our next steps. I wanted to argue, to insist that we keep going, but the exhaustion was bone deep. Nodding reluctantly, I allowed a nurse to remove the electrodes and stumbled out of the lab. The drive home was a blur. As I fumbled with my keys at the apartment door, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom before retching violently, my body rebelling against the strain I'd been putting it through. As I slumped against the cool tile floor, my vision swam. No, not now, I thought desperately. But it was too late. The familiar sensation of falling took hold, and I was pulled into another life, another death. I opened my eyes to a world of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. I was in a hospital bed, but not as a visitor this time. I was the patient. As awareness seeped in, so did the memories. I was Emily Chen, 32 years old, and I was dying of an aggressive form of leukemia. This was my last day, and I knew it. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, Emily's voice weak but warm. A young woman entered, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Lily, Emily's sister. "Hey, Em," she said, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling?" I reached out, taking Lily's hand in mine. "It's okay, Lil. You don't have to pretend for me." Lily's composure crumbled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's not fair," she sobbed. "You have so much left to do. Your research, your students." Emily's memories flooded through me. Years of dedicated study, groundbreaking work in renewable energy, a passion for teaching that had inspired countless students. And now, all of that potential was slipping away. "Lily," I said, squeezing her hand, "I need you to do something for me. In my office, there's a blue notebook. It has all my latest research notes. I need you to make sure it gets to Dr. Ramirez at the university. He'll know what to do with it." Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Of course, Em. Anything." As we sat there, talking softly about memories and unfulfilled dreams, I felt a familiar pressure building in my chest. Emily's time was running out, and so was mine in her body. "Lily," I gasped, feeling Emily's heart begin to falter. "Remember, the work is important. Don't let it end here." As Lily called frantically for a nurse, I felt myself being pulled away, torn from Emily's fading consciousness. The last thing I heard was the high-pitched whine of a flatline. I jolted awake on my bathroom floor, gasping for air. My phone was buzzing insistently in my pocket. With shaking hands, I pulled it out to see a string of missed calls from Dr. Emerson. Before I could call her back, another wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the toilet, retching painfully. When I looked down, my blood ran cold. The toilet bowl was streaked with red. In a daze, I dialed Dr. Emerson's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Jake, where are you? We've been trying to reach you for hours." "I'm home," I croaked. "But something's wrong. I'm coughing up blood." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Stay where you are. I'm sending an ambulance." The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, concerned faces, and medical jargon I couldn't quite grasp. I found myself back in the hospital, but this time as a patient. Dr. Patel entered my room, his face grave. "Jake, we've got your test results back. I'm afraid it's not good news." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "Just tell me, Doc. Your body is shutting down," he said softly. "The strain of these experiences, it's causing massive organ failure. We can try to slow it down, but..." But you can't stop it, I finished for him. He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I'm so sorry, Jake. We should never have pushed you this far. A strange calm settled over me. How long? I asked. Dr. Patel hesitated. It's hard to say for certain. A few days, maybe a week at most. I let out a bitter laugh. So this is it, huh? I've witnessed so many deaths, and now it's my turn. Dr. Emerson burst into the room, her usual composure shattered. Jake, we're not giving up. There has to be something we can do, some way to reverse this. I shook my head. It's okay, Doc, really. I think maybe this is how it's supposed to be. She sat heavily in the chair beside my bed. What do you mean? All those lives I stepped into, all those deaths I witnessed, they all had something left unfinished, something important. Maybe this is my unfinished business. Maybe by going through this, we can finally understand what it all means. Dr. Patel and Dr. Emerson exchanged a look. Jake, Dr. Patel said gently, what are you suggesting? I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my chest. I want you to monitor me, until the end. Maybe if we can capture what happens when I go, we can finally unlock the mystery of consciousness, of what happens after. Dr. Emerson shook her head vehemently. Absolutely not. We're not going to sit by and watch you die, Jake. We're doctors. We save lives. But think of how many lives this could save, I argued. If we can understand what happens at the moment of death, think of the breakthroughs we could make. In medicine, in neuroscience, in our understanding of human consciousness itself. A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Dr. Patel spoke. It's your choice, Jake. If this is really what you want, we'll do it. Dr. Emerson looked like she wanted to protest, but she remained silent, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. Over the next few days, my hospital room was transformed into a high-tech research lab. Monitors beeped constantly, tracking every fluctuation in my failing body. A team of researchers worked around the clock, preparing for what we all knew was coming. As my condition deteriorated, the experiences, the deaths, came more frequently. I slipped in and out of other lives, other endings, barely able to distinguish them from my own fading reality. In my lucid moments, I dictated everything I could remember, every detail of the lives I'd touched and the deaths I'd witnessed. Dr. Emerson and Dr. Patel were there constantly, recording every word, analyzing every scrap of data, on what we all knew would be my last night. Dr. Emerson sat by my bed, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Jake, she said softly, are you sure about this? It's not too late to... I cut her off with a weak wave of my hand. I'm sure, Doc. This is important. It has to mean something. She nodded, blinking back tears. It will, Jake. I promise you, it will. As the monitors beeped more urgently, signaling my body's final decline, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I had witnessed so many endings, and now, finally, I would experience my own. Dr. Emerson, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Thank you for believing in me, for helping me understand. She squeezed my hand, unable to speak. As my vision began to dim, I felt that familiar sensation of falling. But this time, it was different. Instead of being pulled into another life, I felt as if I was expanding, my consciousness stretching out to encompass something vast and unknowable. In that final moment, as the line between my life and all the others I'd experienced blurred and faded, I understood. We were all connected, all part of something greater than ourselves. Every life, every death, every moment of joy and sorrow. They were all threads in the grand tapestry of existence. And as I let go, surrendering to whatever lay beyond, I knew that my journey, our journey, was far from over. It was only the beginning. The monitors flatlined, their shrill tone cutting through the hushed silence of the room. but in the data they collected, in the readings they took in those final moments, lay the seeds of a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. My story was ending, but the ripples of its impact were just beginning to spread, reaching out to touch lives in ways I could never have imagined. And somewhere, in the vast unknown that lay beyond, I waited, ready to witness, to experience, to understand. The countdown had reached 0, but the true journey was only just beginning. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the dimly lit hospital room. I lay there, my body a mere shell of what it once was, tethered to this world by a web of tubes and wires. Dr. Emerson sat beside my bed, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. "Jake," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your latest scans. I've never seen anything like it. Your brain activity is off the charts, but your body..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I tried to smile, but even that small gesture was almost too much effort. "It's okay, Doc. We both know where this is heading." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But that's just it, Jake. We don't know. What you're experiencing, what your brain is doing, it defies everything we understand about neuroscience, about consciousness itself." As if on cue, I felt the familiar pull of another episode coming on. "It's happening again," I managed to gasp out before the world faded away. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a sun-drenched living room. The walls were covered with photos of a life well lived. Children growing up, grandchildren being born, anniversaries celebrated. I was sitting in a comfortable armchair, my hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, resting on a worn photo album. As awareness seeped in, so did the memories. I was Harold Thompson, 92 years old, and today was my last day on Earth. But unlike the other deaths I had experienced, this one came with a sense of peace, of completion. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reverie. "Come in," I called, Harold's voice warm and strong despite his age. A middle-aged woman entered, her smile tinged with sadness. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah, Harold's youngest daughter. I felt a surge of love and pride that wasn't entirely my own. "I'm doing just fine, sweetheart," I replied. "Come, sit with me for a while." As Sarah settled onto the couch beside me, I found myself speaking, sharing Harold's memories and wisdom. "You know, Sarah, when you get to my age, you start to see things differently. All those worries and fears that seemed so important, they fade away. What remains is love, the connections we've made, the lives we've touched." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, please don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. The doctor said..." I cut her off gently. "Sarah, we both know that's not true. And it's okay. I've had a good life, a long life. I'm ready for whatever comes next." As we sat there talking about old memories and shared experiences, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Harold had lived a full life, had loved and been loved in return. His time was ending, yes, but he was leaving behind a legacy in the lives he had touched. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I felt the familiar tug signaling the end of the episode. But this time, it was different. Instead of being violently torn away, I felt myself gently fading, merging with Harold's consciousness in a way I had never experienced before. In that moment of unity, I understood something fundamental about life and death, about the nature of consciousness itself. It wasn't about clinging to existence at all costs, but about embracing the natural cycle of life, about making our time count. I gasped awake in my hospital bed, tears streaming down my face. Dr. Emerson was there instantly, concern etched on her features. "Jake, what happened? What did you see?" I took a shuddering breath, trying to put into words the profound experience I had just had. I think I finally understand," I whispered. Over the next hour, I recounted every detail of Harold's last day, of the peace and acceptance I had felt. Dr. Emerson listened intently, her eyes widening as she grasped the implications. Jake, this could change everything we think we know about death and consciousness, she said, her voice filled with awe. I nodded weakly. But it's more than that, Doc. I think I know why this has been happening to me, why I've been experiencing all these deaths. Dr. Emerson leaned in, her curiosity palpable. Why, Jake? What's the purpose? I closed my eyes, gathering my thoughts. It's about choice, I said finally. Every life I've stepped into, every death I've witnessed, they all had something left unfinished, some regret or fear holding them back. But Harold, he was ready. He had made peace with his life, with his choices. And in doing so, he showed me what I need to do. Dr. Emerson frowned, confusion clear on her face. What do you mean, Jake? What do you need to do? I opened my eyes, meeting her gaze steadily. I need to make a choice, Doc. A final choice. To hold on, to keep fighting, or to let go. To embrace whatever comes next with the same peace Harold had. The room fell silent as the weight of my words sank in. Finally, Dr. Emerson spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake, are you choosing to die? I shook my head slowly. Not die, exactly. But to stop fighting against what's happening to me. To embrace it, to see where this journey leads. Maybe that's been the point all along. To learn how to let go. Dr. Emerson stood abruptly, pacing the small room. Jake, I can't just sit by and watch you give up. We're doctors. We're supposed to save lives, not facilitate death. I reached out, catching her hand as she passed. You have saved me, Doc. You've helped me understand something profound about life, about consciousness. But now I need to take this final step on my own. She sank back into her chair, tears glistening in her eyes. What do you need from me? She asked softly. Just be here, I replied. Witness this. Learn from it. And promise me you'll use what we've discovered to help others, to change how we think about life and death. Dr. Emerson nodded solemnly. I promise, Jake. Whatever happens, your experiences, your sacrifice, it won't be in vain. As night fell, a strange calm settled over the hospital room. The constant beeping of machines faded into the background as I prepared myself for what was to come. Dr. Emerson remained by my side, her presence a comforting anchor as I stood on the precipice of the unknown. I think it's time, I said softly, feeling a familiar pull, stronger than ever before. Dr. Emerson squeezed my hand, her voice thick with emotion. Jake, I thank you for your courage, for your trust. Whatever happens next, know that you've changed everything. You've opened doors we never even knew existed. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. Thank you, Doc, for believing in me, for helping me understand. Remember your promise. This is just the beginning. As I closed my eyes, surrendering to the pull, I felt myself expanding, my consciousness stretching out beyond the confines of my failing body. But this time, instead of being thrust into another life, another death, I found myself in a vast, luminous space. Countless threads of light surrounded me, each one a life, a consciousness. I could see how they all interconnected, forming a tapestry of existence more beautiful and complex than I could have ever imagined. And there, in the midst of it all, were the lives I had touched. Rick, Margaret, Amelia, Mark, Sophia, Elias, Emily, Harold. They were all there, their experiences, their unfinished business, woven into the fabric of something greater. I understood then, with a clarity that transcended words, that this was the true nature of consciousness. Not isolated sparks of awareness, but a vast interconnected web of experience and potential. As I merged with this cosmic tapestry, I felt a profound sense of homecoming. This was where I belonged, where we all belonged in the end. And yet, it wasn't an ending at all, but a new beginning, a transformation into something greater than I could have ever imagined. Back in the hospital room, the monitors flatlined, their shrill tone cutting through the hushed silence. Dr. Emerson sat there, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed something that defied all scientific understanding. For in those final moments, as Jake's physical form slipped away, the readings from his brain showed activity that should have been impossible, neural connections forming and reforming at an unprecedented rate, as if his consciousness was expanding, reaching out to touch something vast and unknowable. And in labs and hospitals around the world for just a brief moment, other patients in comas in near-death states showed similar spikes of impossible brain activity. It was as if in that instant, Jake had become a conduit, a bridge between individual consciousness and something far greater. As the sun rose on a new day, Dr. Emerson stood at the window of the now quiet hospital room, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had witnessed. Jake was gone, yes, but the impact of his journey, of his final choice, was only just beginning to be felt. She turned to her team, who had been monitoring the events from an adjacent room. Their faces were a mix of awe, confusion, and excitement. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Let's get to work. We have a promise to keep, and a whole new understanding of consciousness to explore." As they filed out, ready to begin analyzing the mountain of data Jake's final moments had produced, Dr. Emerson paused, looking back at the now empty bed. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered. "Wherever you are now, I hope you found your answers, and I promise we'll make sure your choice, your sacrifice, changes everything." With that, she squared her shoulders and walked out, ready to face the new frontier of science and understanding that Jake's journey had opened up. The choice had been made, the threshold crossed. Now, it was up to those left behind to unravel the mysteries that lay ahead, and to honor the profound legacy of one man's extraordinary journey through life, death, and whatever lay beyond. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the air as Dr. Emerson stood at the foot of Jake's hospital bed, her eyes fixed on the motionless form before her. It had been 3 days since Jake's extraordinary passing, and the scientific community was in an uproar over the data collected during his final moments. "Any changes?" Dr. Patel asked, entering the room with a stack of papers under his arm. Dr. Emerson shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing. By all medical standards, he's gone. And yet—" She trailed off, gesturing to the monitors that still showed faint, inexplicable neural activity. It was as if Jake's consciousness was still present, hovering on the edge of something beyond their understanding. "The latest analysis just came in," Dr. Patel said, spreading the papers on a nearby table. It's unlike anything we've ever seen." As they pored over the data, a nurse entered the room, her face pale. "Doctors, you need to see this. It's happening again." They rushed to the nurses' station, where monitors showed a sudden spike in neural activity across multiple patients in the hospital. Those in comas, those near death, even some who were simply sleeping. "It's just like when Jake—" Dr. Emerson couldn't finish the sentence, her mind reeling with the implications. As they watched in awe, the activity subsided as quickly as it had begun. But something had changed. Alarms began to sound from various rooms as patients who had been unresponsive for months, even years, suddenly showed signs of waking. "This is impossible," Dr. Patel breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Dr. Emerson was already moving, rushing back to Jake's room with a renewed sense of urgency. As she burst through the door, she froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Jake's eyes were open. "Jake," she whispered, afraid to believe what she was seeing. "Can you hear me?" Slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep, Jake turned his head towards her voice. His eyes, once clouded by illness, now shone with a clarity and depth that took her breath away. "Dr. Emerson," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse but filled with a strange serenity. I saw everything. As Dr. Patel and the nurses rushed in, checking vitals and expressing amazement at Jake's sudden recovery, Dr. Emerson leaned in close, her voice urgent. "Jake, what happened? Where were you?" Jake closed his eyes for a moment as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. "It's hard to explain. I was everywhere. Nowhere. I saw the connections, the threads that bind us all, and I understood." Over the next few hours, as Jake's strength gradually returned, he tried to put into words the profound experience he had undergone. He spoke of a vast consciousness, a tapestry of interconnected minds that spanned not just space but time itself. It was like I could see the entire history of human consciousness, stretching out in all directions, Jake explained, his eyes distant with the memory. And I realized that what we think of as individual minds are really just nodes in a much larger network. Dr. Emerson listened intently, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile Jake's mystical experience with the hard data they had collected. "But Jake, how is this possible? We saw your brain activity cease. By all medical standards, you were dead?" Jake finished with a small smile. "Maybe I was. Or maybe we just don't understand what death really is yet." As word of Jake's miraculous recovery spread, the hospital became a hive of activity. Researchers and doctors from around the world clamored for access, desperate to understand what had happened. But amidst the chaos, Jake remained calm, centered in a way he had never been before. It was as if his journey had fundamentally altered his perception of reality. Late that night, when the commotion had finally died down, Dr. Emerson sat by Jake's bedside, her mind still reeling from the day's events. "Jake," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He nodded, his gaze steady. "When you were gone, did you somehow influence the other patients, the ones who woke up?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I don't think influence is the right word," he finally said. "It was more like opening a door, showing them a path back." Dr. Emerson leaned forward, her voice intense. "But how? Jake, what you're describing, it goes against everything we know about neuroscience, about the nature of consciousness itself." Jake smiled, a look of profound understanding in his eyes. "Maybe it's time we rewrite what we think we know, Doc. The experiences I had, the lives I witnessed, they were all leading to this, to a new understanding of what it means to be conscious, to be alive." As they talked deep into the night, Jake shared more of what he had seen and felt during his time in that vast, interconnected consciousness. He spoke of the lives he had touched: Rick, Margaret, Amelia, Mark, Sophia, Elias, Emily, Harold, and how their unfinished business had somehow been resolved in that cosmic tapestry of minds. "It's like their consciousness didn't end with death," Jake explained, struggling to find the right words. "It transformed, became part of something greater, and in doing so, it completed what was left unfinished in life." Dr. Emerson shook her head in amazement. "Jake, do you realize what this means? If what you're saying is true, it could revolutionize our entire understanding of life and death, of consciousness itself." Jake nodded solemnly. "I know, and that's why I came back, Doc, to help bridge the gap between what I experienced and what science can understand and verify." As dawn broke, painting the hospital room in soft hues of pink and gold, Jake and Dr. Emerson sat in comfortable silence, both contemplating the profound journey ahead. Suddenly, Jake sat up straighter, a look of urgency on his face. "There's something else, Doc. Something important." Dr. Emerson leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Jake?" "During my time away, I saw something. A potential future, I think. There's a child who's going to be born soon. A child who could change everything." Dr. Emerson frowned, confused. "What do you mean, change everything?" Jake's eyes were distant, as if seeing something beyond the hospital walls. This child, they'll have an ability similar to what I experienced, but stronger. They'll be able to consciously connect with that greater network of minds, to bridge the gap between individual consciousness and the collective. That's incredible, Jake. But how can we possibly find this child? Jake turned to her, his gaze intense. We don't have to find them, Doc. They'll find us. But we need to be ready. We need to understand as much as we can about what happened to me, about the nature of consciousness itself. Because when this child comes, they're going to need our help to navigate their abilities. Dr. Emerson nodded, her mind already racing with the implications. All right, Jake, where do we start? Jake smiled, a look of determination on his face. We start by sharing what we've learned, not just with the scientific community, but with everyone. People need to understand that consciousness, that life itself, is so much more vast and interconnected than we ever imagined. As the hospital began to stir with the start of a new day, Jake and Dr. Emerson began to plan. They would face skepticism, doubt, and perhaps even fear from those unwilling to accept such a radical shift in understanding. But they also knew that what they had discovered had the potential to change the world in profound and beautiful ways. It's not going to be easy, Dr. Emerson said, a hint of worry in her voice. Jake reached out, taking her hand in his. No, it won't be. But nothing truly revolutionary ever is. We've been given a gift, Doc. A chance to expand the boundaries of human knowledge and experience. We owe it to ourselves, to everyone, to see this through. As they sat there, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window, both felt a sense of standing on the threshold of something monumental. The journey that had begun with Jake's strange experiences of death had led them to a new understanding of life itself. And now, with the promise of a child who could bridge worlds, they faced a future filled with infinite possibilities. Well then, Dr. Emerson said, squeezing Jake's hand, I guess we'd better get to work. Jake nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Yes, we'd better. After all, we've got a whole new chapter of human understanding to write. As they began to discuss their next steps, the hospital around them buzzed with the energy of new beginnings. Patients who had been given up for lost were reuniting with joyful families. Doctors and nurses moved with a new sense of purpose, aware that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. And somewhere in a place beyond time and space, the vast tapestry of consciousness shimmered with potential, ready to welcome a new mind that would change everything. The awakening had begun, and with it, a new era of human evolution was dawning. Jake looked out the window, his eyes filled with wonder at the world he now perceived so differently. You know, Doc, he said softly, I think this is just the beginning. The real journey. It's only just starting. Dr. Emerson nodded, her face alight with the excitement of discovery. Then let's make it count, Jake. For all of us. As they settled in to begin their work, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter in this extraordinary story to unfold. The awakening had come full circle, and now the true adventure was about to begin, as